hell for eternity in a form of death, of the eternal torture. And it's precisely this kind of misinterpretation, whether it's biblical scripture or ancient mythology, that scares me. That is very prevalent within the world. It doesn't matter whether they're Illuminists, types of Christians, types of Muslims, types of Hindus, even pagans. There's an element of distortion which starts to accentuate the death as the means for the ongoing of life, a kind of a paradox, if you will, as opposed to the idea of debt forgiveness, which tends to be the concept that I favor as an interpretation, particularly of the scriptures that are known as the Bible. Does that make sense to you?
No, it does, and it's really interesting. Get out of my head that you've mentioned that, because today I was having another conversation, and we were actually talking about the Saturn death cult. And I asked this person, do you think that there's a propensity that every single tradition on planet Earth has been touched in discombobulated, where the alchemy has been flipped on its head in a very deceiving way, even the indigenous traditions? And this person was like, absolutely, like there's something that is not right. There are pockets, like you say, of people who know what the jig is, but from the mass perception, the history has been skewed purposefully, so people don't really know like what's going down.
Yes, the Saturn death cult was written to try and provide people with the tools to recognize, irrespective of their culture, irrespective of their belief system and so on, where any single belief system might be being manipulated, and how to sort of get back onto a right path, if you know what I mean. It is actually what I consider to be at the core of the problem of humanity, more than this monarchist idea of good versus evil. It's every individual has the capacity to interpret events in ways that they see it for selfish gain and so on. It's this culture of misinterpretation. That's what I call the Saturn death cult. And it applies, right? It even applies to atheists.
Yes, it does.
It applies to science, as we know it in the world today, to what's going on in the academic sciences that you would consider as far removed from religion as possible. But in fact, you see the same tendencies there that have led to, as I say, what I call this culture, a Saturn death cult culture. It's an underlying culture that promotes the idea that people can take certain bits of information and simply decide to use them as control mechanisms for their own purposes. And hopefully Saturn death cult gives people the tools to be able to make more informed decisions when they're confronted with materials and arguments and so on from people.
You're absolutely right. And what's so interesting, and people probably get sick of me saying this, but the truth is hidden in plain sight, because in the esoteric books of planet Earth, if you will, the information, if you're a metaphysician and you're very keen, it's hidden and you can actually decode it and do the things that you're doing. And you can plainly see how society, from a secular perspective, no matter which way they're living, whether that's Christianity, Islam, or indigenous, that they're worshiping from a Saturn death cult perspective, meaning death ritual perspective and everything. Look at, and I'll give an example, and some people may not agree with what I'm saying, but like the whole perception in the way that the crucifixion of Christ, it's almost like this really deep sadomasochist like blood ritual. It's sort of fascinating and deep. People killing each other on the aspect of these mundane aspects of reality through the essence of religion. It's sort of twisted, Troy, and I'm trying to figure out Is anyone like reading between the lines when it comes to their esoteric books and what the basic principle is? Are they missing it? It's very strange.
Yeah. I mean, the way that the death on the cross in biblical scripture has been portrayed, for instance, the Catholic Church is a classic example, with its churches showing this image at the front of its at its altars, in its buildings. It's an absolute exploitation of the macabre aspects of what is reported in the Bible to have gone down, and it has been used, I believe anyway, to promote a cult type of approach to the personality of Christ, rather than a completely intellectual or spiritual approach to the words of Christ. And this is one of the things that stands out most to somebody like myself, coming from that background. There's the emphasis on there. In Saturn Death Cult, in the late, second part of Saturn Death Cult, I go in at some length to how these rituals that have developed in Christianity were very much co-opted into rituals that were ages old, going back to Babylon and further, and are basically distortions of the mythological record, which have been personified to supposedly reflect actual events on Earth, and so therefore people act them out. It goes very much back to the fratricide, regicide aspects of the Jupiter or the Jovian conflict with Saturn, you can take it even further, and you start getting into the whole cannibalistic aspect of Saturn devouring his children, and how that has manifested itself in the rituals of the church. Yeah,
it's very interesting, and taking it outside of the church and the popular media, you have all of these zombies and cannibalism, if you will. It's just, I don't know, it's very interesting how everywhere you look, the Saturn Death Cult signature is permeating, if you will, in this reality.
Yeah.
And before we got on air, I was telling you about Space Odyssey 2001 and how I found it very interesting about Stanley Kubrick, which he has been known to show many occult images. And to be honest, I think that's why he may not be here right now, is because he might have given a little bit too much information. And things manifested
Definitely
for him not to be here on planet Earth. But I found it very interesting at the end of the movie of Space Odyssey, how you see Jupiter rising, if you will, with this huge monolith, with this child in the womb. And I said to when I saw that again, and I've seen this movie a million times because it's one of my favorite movies. It's like this metaphysical, symbolism everywhere. I found that to be quite interesting, if you will. When it comes to his I guess, symbolism. And I know that you were telling me that in the book, I'd never read the book, but in the book that there's also Saturn symbology along with Jupiter.
Well, what is known is that Kubrick desperately wanted the planet Saturn to be what would you call the background, the location for his story. But the story is that they couldn't get the rings of Saturn looking good in the special effects department, so he opted for Jupiter. And I have to say that the alchemist, J. Widener, one of the good guys as far as I'm concerned, his studies into Kubrick as literally a film-making alchemist are they're very much an influence on how I view this, the role that Kubrick found himself drawn to play in all this. And Jay Weidner says, he just doesn't buy it that they couldn't get the special effects team to make an authentic-looking rings for Saturn. That in fact, Kubrick was pressured to make that change, so as not to be too obvious in what he was showing. Jay Weidner's argument is that 2001: Space Odyssey is actually an alchemical initiation rite for the audience at large into the idea that the human species is heading for a transformation or a transmutation into a star child. In other words, the next evolutionary step for mankind, and then basically his later films expose that there is a hidden occult, a hidden group of people who are trying to basically make this happen, and that basically sums up Weidner's argument in terms of Kubrick's, attempt at displaying this. How can I say it? His attempt at visualizing what is in store for us, what is planned for us. This idea that we are to become star child people as part of our next evolutionary step. You were saying, dear, that the end shot there with the child in the womb with Jupiter, that is such an incredibly Saturnian image, because when you go back to the polar configuration as I postulated in Saturn Death Cult, or what Saturn theory calls it, what you see is Saturn with its rings. Underneath Saturn is Venus, which is the feminine Venus, and within Venus, or silhouetted against Venus, is Mars. So Mars is in the womb of Venus, and under the father figure of Saturn. And I think it's a tragedy for Kubrick that he was not able to actually expose that ancient archetype, the child in the womb protected by the father, that very ancient archetype, because he could not use actually Saturn. He had to use Jupiter. And so I tend to believe Jay Weidner is correct. I think he was very much pressurized into making that one particular change.
I think so too, and I think that to a certain extent through his career that he tried to reveal more and more as time went on, and I think that his last movie really revealed that, and that's why after that last movie that he did, Eyes Wide Shut, that he literally was taken out. And a lot of people may think that I'm crazy, but, as we know, Troy, in the element of Hollywood, there's a reason why Hollywood is called Hollywood, because Hollywood was the wood that wizards used during the medieval times to be able to create magic. So it is, it's very well known that people in that genre are constantly doing occult ritual, if you will, in the space of humanity, through humanity, as they are being voyeurs on these pictures, these movies. We're giving our energy, focusing up our energy over to these things. But it's interesting how you said that this shows the potentiality of us being a star child, when Jupiter, from the Egyptian mythos, is Isis. That's the feminine principle. And, when you talk about Osiris, Isis, and Horus, that is the Trinity. So I thought it's interesting that even though he couldn't show Saturn, that Jupiter was revealed, Isis, giving birth to the womb of a new evolutionary process of mankind, this vortex and the monolith, if you will, which to me in the movies are stargates. So that's to me, I find that very, very interesting, even though, it should have been the other way around, but it does reveal a lot.
Yeah, I think, it's probably a testament to Kubrick's genius that he was still able to get the basic message across for those who had, eyes to see and ears to hear, that, it was still there. And, I mean, my hat goes off to Jay Weidner. He was the guy whose investigation into this alerted me to it. And it basically happened for myself, looking into Kubrick. because I actually I myself have worked in the